Much worse than paranormal. When I was 8, we were having a long holiday, staying with some family in a town called Surat. It's in a country, Queensland, Australia. I was staying in their son's room who had moved to Brisbane for university. Each night I had the same reoccurring nightmare of an alien tentacle trying to grab me. After a week I was terrified of going to sleep, but my parents kept telling me that it was okay. I was just frightened because we were staying somewhere new and that it would be okay. Well, I couldn't get to sleep. I kept watching the clock, waiting for the sun to come up, and terrified of that alien. It was just after 2 a.m. when a large tentacle landed on the bed. I screamed in terror as I felt the tentacle wiggling. I jumped out of bed and kept screaming. My parents, aunt, uncle, and sister run into the room to find me huddled in the corner screaming. Turns out, it was an adult carpet python, over 7 feet. Each night it worked its way under a ceiling tile and onto the bed. I still have an Indiana Jones fear of snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes? Midnight Monster here. You just got a taste of our first story. There's still 8 more stories jam-packed in today's episode of Much Worse Than Paranormal. Drop a like on this video and click that subscribe button so you never miss any of these creepy, unexplained stories that Midnight Monster releases daily. As a younger kid, I had nightmares of waking up to see my mother hovering over my bed by the window. She just blankly stared down at me and my sister. I'd get so scared, yelling, "Mom! Mom!" and she never responded. It knew it was not my mom. When I was older, I told my aunt about it and she told me that they weren't dreams. It was real. My mom would go into our rooms randomly to check on us. She had serious mental health issues that got worse over the years. Occasionally, she would have episodes of anxiety about something happening to us and guard us at night. Due to the traumatic death of her first child, apparently triggered obsessive anxiety when we were younger. I now know the whole fucked up backstory and can sympathize with why it would make any parent get to the mental state, but I still shudder when I think of that blank face stare. I still tend to associate the nightmare mom with not being my mom. When I was around 11 years old, my family said I would randomly flip out for no reason. We'd be sitting at dinner and my mom told me, on more than one occasion, I'd throw my silverware across the room and start cursing and wailing at my brother. Completely unprovoked, I'd start beating the shit out of my then 8 and 10-year-old brothers, and one time, I even hit my grandma. It got to a point where I'd have to go and eat by myself. The worst part of it was that I had no memory of these outbursts at all. I had no idea why my brothers were afraid of me, why I'd have to eat alone every night, and why everyone seemingly hated me. It was an extremely alienating childhood experience, to say the least. And for a short time I was suicidal. Not in action, but definitely in my thoughts. My teachers, friends, and other family members couldn't understand what my family was talking about. To them, I was the sweetest, smartest, and most humblest kid they've ever met. I was loved by everyone outside of my home. My mom brought me to a psychologist, a therapist, and at one point a Catholic priest. She actually thought I may have shown signs of possession. She told me I'd become a different kid in front of their eyes, and because I had no recollection of anything, she'd been talking about, seeing the extent of what she was willing to do to get to the bottom of it. I was inclined to believe her. One day, with my dad, I went to the movies and fell in the lobby and hit my head. It gave me a nasty concussion. To make a long story short, a CAT scan had been done, and they found out I had a cyst in my head below the anchoroid of my left temporal lobe. The cyst was the size of a baseball, and it was growing. My brain was being crushed against the right side of my skull and was causing severe damage to my medulla oblongata. We went to a neurologist at Stony Brook University Hospital who took a closer look at my case. A very bright doctor by the name of Dr. Egnor. This man saved my life. He said that falling and hitting my head was a miracle because I was mere weeks away from dying in my sleep of a hemorrhage, and said I needed to be in surgery by the end of the week. It was at that point he asked my mom why they hadn't brought me in sooner. She was like, "Well, I'm not a neurologist, so..." And he said, "I'm sure he's been showing signs of something going wrong. Outburst of anger, memory loss, unexplained nosebleeds, severe depression, something." I'll never forget the look on my mom's face. Her eyes widened. She turned and looked at me, grabbed my face, and started sobbing uncontrollably. I still get emotional thinking about this. She just kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," over and over. Tears poured down her face, and I just looked in her eyes and said, "It's okay, Mommy. I'm gonna get better soon," with a hopeful bounce in my voice. That was 22 years ago. The doctor that saved my life, and there was no complications after the surgery. The outburst had completely stopped, and after only a month of recovery, I was back in school and have gotten on the honor roll for the first time in my life. I was able to fix my relationships with my brothers by being the best brother I could be for them, and for the last 2 years of my grandma's life, I made sure I told her I loved her every single day, and never said anything even remotely nasty to her. That surgery fixed me in so many ways, and I all owe it to the slip and fall at the movie theater. When my friends and I initially entered college, we used to chill a lot at my friend's dad's house, who lived out in the country. Late at night, when scanning the horizon, you could see all the stars. It wasn't like the city, but you could just also see the radio tower, perhaps a few miles away. One late fall night, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, we decided to drive out to this radio tower, just out of curiosity. It was in the middle of a larger field with one entrance that happened to be open. We entered from there and drove about 1/4 mile in towards the radio tower. When we got there, we noticed, underneath the radio tower, a rusty, beat-up old car. The thing looked like it hadn't been driven in years. We pulled to the other side of the tower and just chilled there for a bit, talking about whatever and listening to music. Then, one of my friends pointed towards the beat-up car. "Does it look like there's a light in there?" Well, we all stared in this car, and sure enough, emanating behind the dust-covered windows of the car was a dim light. We pretty quickly put our car in drive and started moving out towards it. It was a field though, so of course we moved relatively slow. The same friend who pointed out the light noticed that the car started moving along with us, following slowly. It did not put on its headlights, but the light inside the car seemed to glow brighter. That was the moment my friend driving screamed, "Fuck it," and hightailed it faster than I've ever seen. We left the junk car in the dust, literally in this case, and from that day we had always referred to this car as the ghost car story. Did we really believe in ghosts? Probably not, but paranormal is better than whatever else it could have been. Come to find out a few years later, that field was regularly being monitored by the local sheriff's office for a big drug deal that apparently went down there. He had stuck around any longer that night, we could have legitimately been killed. This was also in the era that we watched a lot of Breaking Bad, so in retrospect, it seemed to us like that could have very much been a likely outcome from that night. Luckily, we're all good and nothing bad ever came of it from us. My family has a farm which is pretty isolated. There are other houses near but are mostly abandoned. I spent a winter break there alone when I was 17. I would be alone Monday to Friday and my dad and brother would come on the weekends as it was a Christmas school break. I had some meat in a smoker next to my house. It's like a separate shed with a pizza oven, and we smoke dry and meat and keep the logs and wood for the fireplace. So anyways, it's around 3 a.m. winter. It's night and it's been snowing for a few days. The first layer of snow froze and the wind's blowing new snow on top of it. As I'm walking from the house to the smoker, I'm admiring the noise it makes. Kinda like pouring sugar in a bowl. I kinda stop and enjoy the sound. I check up on the fire in the smoker and make sure it's out, get some more firewood for the house and go to bed. I lock the door and go into the house. Still hear the noise it makes when it hits the surface. Went into the house and dropped the firewood next to the furnace and go out on the porch to put the ashes out from the fire in the bin. And then, I hear it. Silence, complete and utter silence. At first, I think that it stopped snowing, but the snow is still falling the same way it was a minute ago. Immediately, I feel something is up. So as I'm turning my head scared, I'm expecting something to happen, and the hairs on my neck and arms have already stood up. Then, I hear a faint song like a lullaby of a woman singing a baby to sleep. Nothing other than this song can be heard, even though it's fairly quiet and from a distance. Instant there, and I'm frozen, not moving, and the song's echoing from the woods, but also kind of around the house, so I'm not expecting anyone to jump out, but I didn't know where the noise is coming from. I run to the house and lock myself in the bedroom. The house is near the woods and it's been snowing and it's 3 a.m. Nobody would ever come close to the house. So I'm creeped out and can't sleep. I locked myself in the bedroom and stayed there until morning. Nothing happened and I did not hear the sound again. When I think of it, the sound stopped when I ran inside. When my dad came a few days later, he spends the weekends with me there and goes back to work on Monday. He just shrugged it off and said it may be time to go back home. I went home with him that Monday and never spent a day on my own in that house ever since. It was a few months later that I found out what really happened. The farm is a small village populated by mostly old people, and some of them have no family and live alone. One old lady went missing that winter, but nobody reported it, as she had no family or friends who would notice it. She lived in a small house on the far side of the forest with no electricity. She most likely had a stroke at some point or needed some sort of help as she went through the woods towards our house. The lights in our house were on, so it's visible at night, so that may be why she came to it. But also, as my grandma was a living village doctor, she may have remembered her and wanted help. So, the old woman tried to walk through these woods and could not speak, and she fell into a hole, like a dried up river basin, and got stuck in there and died. She was found a few months later in the woods, which are approximately 2 miles from our house. I'll never forget that sound she made and how it sounded exactly like an old lullaby. Not sure if it was because of the stroke or if I imagined it. I was not okay for some time. It was a summer night in Southern California, midnight or so. I was living with my grandparents for the season and taking online courses. For context, my grandparents live on the edge of sort of the green belt, except it wasn't very green. And there were lots of hungry wild animals who would wander onto the property. So I would step out onto this balcony at night and do my coursework and smoke cigarettes for a few hours, come back in and go to bed. The balcony was on the second story, but it was right next to a split-level roof. There was about a 3-foot gap between the railing to the balcony and the awning above it, and you could crawl right onto the roof using the gap. Or, at night, when it was pitch black beyond the balcony, things could crawl out of it at you. So, here I was, doing what I've been doing for a month at that point, smoking and reading and riding in the warm, dark night with a lonely light bulb as my only companion. The dark gap between my roofs was always above me at the right, and it occasionally caught my eye, as voids tend to. But I'd spent 20 summers at this house and I felt completely comfortable. Until all of a fucking sudden this insistent prickling began at the nape of my neck. Just below it, actually ringing down my collarbone and into the tops of my shoulder blades even as it ran up my neck. The hand I was using to ash my cigarette froze before I'd even formed the feeling I was in danger. You know when you involuntarily gulp because something takes you so off guard? This was one of those moments. A second of pure dread. I looked around, stared hard at the gap between the walls, stood up slowly and looked some more. There had been no sounds, no vibrations, no nothing. And yet my primal brain was convinced that there was something and that I was being watched. I ignored my primal brain, classic mistake, sat back down, gingerly pulled my laptop back into my lap, typed slowly, only 2 fingers while I listened for another, whatever the hell that had been. I did not light another cigarette. My peripheral was straining to stay on the gap between the walls. Something about it was different. Something about it was dark. My brain said just dark. And I did not see anything, but I felt it and I knew it, and my spine was screaming at me again. Get inside, get inside, get inside. I slammed my laptop and hopped up and yanked open the sliding door, slamming it behind me and through the lock and strode. Ran to the bathroom where I knew a window was open. A window that led to some stretch of a roof that had suddenly become so dangerous for some unknown reason. And jumped up on the toilet to close the damn thing, and just as I slammed this window shut, something slammed down onto the roof on the other side of it. It was heavy, maybe a raccoon, maybe a man, but it had followed me across the roof and to the other side of the house, and it was heavy. I jumped down from the toilet, and at this time, I darted toward my room, and that fucking thing followed me again. For context, my room was not on the room balcony it was off of, and when I got to my room, suddenly the eerie quietude was replaced with pacing above my head. It was not a man. We can't move fast across roofs. It was not a raccoon. It had about 90 pounds on a raccoon, maybe even more. I heard it pacing in a circle above my bed for at least 1 minute before I heard my grandma call me from down the hall. I went out to meet her and she asked me what that big crash was. She heard it too. I knew I wasn't crazy. When I went back into my room a few minutes later, the pacing was gone. But I never worked on that balcony again at night. I was 11 and recently moved to another city with my family due to my father being in the country's army. We were staying there for a year and thankfully the army gave us a decent house in a complex built for officials with families. Each house had its own large backyard and was separated from the houses by 12-feet concrete walls. One Sunday, my family went to buy some stuff at the supermarket. My oldest sister went with them and my little one was still a baby, so I was going to be alone for a couple hours. I was okay just playing with my dog, but I remembered that I needed to get my black socks for my school's Monday uniform. That resembled a suit and tie. I went to the backyard to get them since they were hanging out to dry. At this point, I was getting bored of waiting for my socks, and I say out loud, "I'm really bored," only to almost immediately hear a young voice close to me say, "Then let's play." The voice was clear but not loud. It did not feel like it came from in front or any other side. It was just there. I turned around to see my normally hyperactive golden retriever sitting quietly staring at me. I look around very fast trying to find the source of the voice, but the house to the right was empty and separated by a concrete wall. The house to the left was over 50 feet away, and behind the wall, behind my house, there was a long wall and nothing but a steep hill and a house at the very bottom of it. I ran for dear life and hid in my parents' bedroom under the covers. I turned on the TV to max volume until they arrived. I explained to them what happened and they had to calm me down the rest of the day. I have no idea what that was to this day. I still cannot put my finger on it. I knew the kids on the house to the left and it wasn't any of their voices. The house to the right did not have any kids, as I learned later, and there were no way some kid climbed a hill, then a 12-foot wall covered in sharp glass at the top just to say that. It was springtime and my boyfriend and I wanted to go for a hike on a semi-popular trail on the edge of town. As we pulled into the parking lot, there was only one other car. It was hidden from the entrance and it struck me as odd as it wasn't closer to the trailhead, but I brushed it off. We started on the quiet, frosty trail. The pathway was packed with hard, crunchy snow, and as we strolled out to the side of the parking lot, I started hearing echoes of our footsteps. I'm a very scared, anxious person, so at first, I thought it was all in my head. But when we stopped abruptly, I heard a shuffling step, delayed, and off rhythm coming from the woods behind us. My heart stopped and I held my breath to listen, and I said, "Did you hear that?" My boyfriend heard nothing. He said, "It's okay, stop worrying." He had his handgun holstered and he would protect me, although that never made me feel entirely safe. I said okay, and we continued walking, and the echoing footsteps faded into ours, until a twig snapped in the wood behind us. My boyfriend's eyes darted to mine, and I stammered loudly, "We're being followed. There's an animal in the woods following us." But we both knew it was not an animal. When animals stalk you, you don't hear them. If you're lucky and downwind, you'll smell a bear before you ever see it. And if you hear it, you'll hear the loud huffs and grunts that it wants you to warn you away. This was no animal. And for some reason, letting the stalker know that I knew they were following us seemed like a bad idea, let alone absolutely terrifying. I had been followed on the street before and was the type to avoid eye contact to try to prevent escalation. I know now is a bad idea. So I thought, hey, if we can play stupid and get out of here unscathed, I'm all for it. So just like that, we turned back and halfway into our car, watching over our shoulders the entire distance. And it was weird, but there were a lot of people in that state, so maybe it was nothing. Almost a month later, a girl my age was kidnapped from that area. When they caught the guy who took her, he confessed to torturing her, brutally murdering her. However, he'd been hunting for a couple to torture and kill for weeks beforehand, like the many couples he'd killed in the past. The news coverage was immense and the town was obsessed. He was living among us. He could have killed any of us. All of the hype comes with that capture of a serial killer in a small town. But my blood ran cold when he was interviewed, saying that one of his frequent hunting spots had been the park, and we'd been stalked and he almost took a couple before he noticed that the man was an off-duty cop. Now, my boyfriend was not a cop, but his gun and holster, his work boots, and the way he carries himself could definitely be interpreted that way. When I was younger, I would have these flashbacks of blurs of people, like cloaked, shadowy figures that would be in the corner of your eye, and when you go to look at them, nobody and nothing was there. If I attempted to just not look at them, let them exist, they would remain. In addition to that, I'd blink and just be somewhere else doing something unrelated, unsure how I got there. Growing up, I sort of just tolerated it and pinned it down to what I believed might be spiritual in nature. A loss of control or whatever. I was young and struggling to make sense of the feeling that out of control, followed by demons. Turns out, after seeing a doctor and a few other incidents that struck as major, extreme sleep deprivation and long-term suppressed trauma was causing me to hallucinate and suffer from paranoia. This became even scarier for a while because people recalled memories and told stories of things that I have literally zero recollection of, bringing into question previous memories I had of things. The blinking and appearing somewhere else wasn't losing control, but a condition when my brain would, in doctors' watered-down version, overload and disengage that memory, taking part of the brain. It wasn't some spiritual attack, but my brain basically turned off the record button from stress. This was scary because episodes would strike where, according to others, I would get a distant gaze and freeze, go still or continue what I was doing as if my body was just on autopilot. I'd stare at people completely unaware, only for me to come back into awareness, not recalling the staring part. These episodes would strike at random and had no warning or indication of how or why. I was terrified to go some places, drive a car, in case I had an episode and crashed. Thinking I was being followed by demons and under some spiritual attack made me at least feel special or somebody was in control. Rather than, hey, your brain just shuts off the memory, hit engage button and it's random. Yeah, you really need to get some long-term help because messed up stuff happened to you in your childhood. Otherwise, you're literally going to go insane. That was 9 paranormal stories that just simply cannot be explained. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. At Midnight Monster, we upload at least a video a day, so there's always going to be something for you to indulge in to get your sweet spook of the day.